So, I'm going to teach you how to torch weld today. Or maybe not teach, I'm not a professional at this. I just taught myself how to torch weld because I needed to. If you have a MIG or TIG welder, you're just going to do it with that. And so any wire welder is going to basically be able to do the same thing or better, actually better. But this is a great way where if you don't have that, all I got is a stick welder. I need to fix this fan. This is for the John Deere backhoe. And you can see there's a bad crack in it. And a chunk of the blade's even missing. And it was like that when we got it. It's never seemed to cause trouble, but while we had it off, I wanted to fix that crack before it got worse. And then we'll probably just try to get a different replacement fan here later. But for now, I at least want to do something about that crack before the rest of that blade comes off. When torch welding, you can get actual torch rod that they sell, but a lot of times I just use welding rod or electrode, technically what's called. And this is 6011. It's got flux on it. It's essentially the same thing your welder does. Your welder just uses electricity to create that arc, and that's your heat point. I'm just using a torch for the heat point instead. And by doing that, I can control the heat better, and you don't have to worry about blowing through like you do on thin stuff. Because you can tell this is thin enough. You're never going to be able to weld this with a stick welder properly. I probably could. It's not too bad, but it's going to be really hard. It's going to be sloppy, and it'd be really easy to make things worse than what they are. So it's easier to just go ahead and torch weld it. All you need is a cutting torch, and I will be using the brazing tip on the torch instead of the cutting tip. Now, when you're doing thicker steel, you're going to want to use a cutting tip. And the reason why is, these generally do not get the steel hot enough for anything that's very heavy. And the cutting tips get things a lot hotter. And so it works in reverse too. You're not going to want to use a cutting tip on something thin like this because it'll want to just melt it. So that's what I'm going to be using, just a regular cutting torch. And you got to start by, it's like brazing in the sense that you've got to clean your material really well. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off this old paint and stuff. Now, I can't get it on this backside very well, but that shouldn't matter. I'm mostly going to just be welding from the front. Now, if you're wondering what the difference is between torch welding and brazing is, it's pretty simple. When you braze, brazing is kind of like soldering. You're just laying, normally it's brass rod, and you're just laying the material on the top, and it adheres to the steel. It doesn't weld or combine with the steel. When you weld, you're melting the steel itself, and your rod steel is actually mixing in with it. It is becoming one solid piece. And so you can think of the difference between torch welding and brazing as brazing more like gluing something together. The glue's what's holding it. The materials themselves don't become one. Whereas torch welding is more like when you're welding acrylic together using a glue or chemical that actually physically melts the two materials, and they mold together then. They actually become one piece of material. That's what this is. There's the difference there. And so think of brazing more like gluing something. Welding, it's becoming one piece of material again. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get started here. And I'm going to try to keep from blocking the view, but I can't guarantee anything. I'm going to try to explain this as good as I can. Clean the air out of my lines. But a lot of this, just like welding or anything, comes down to just get some old scrap metal and just practice. That's how you're going to get good at it. You're going to want your flame out like that, with that same close pattern there. You don't want your flame looking like that. You want it normally down there. And then just adjust your oxygen to settling and your flame size depending on the thickness of your metal. You'll kind of just know as you work. It kind of has to be done by feel. It's another thing you just learn as you practice. So, now to heat your steel overall decent. See, I think I'm going to be a little hot. I can see on how quick my steel is heating up there. So I'm going to turn my flame down a little. More like that. Because you can kind of tell by how quick your steel heats. Now kind of heat everything first. And it's when it starts to turn red, you'll get this rod down there. It'll just kind of automatically start fusing itself and flowing. See, it's starting to, my rod's starting to melt, and you'll see it just flows into the steel on its own. That's how you know you're hot enough. It's kind of like a little bit similar to forge welding in a way. They always said there was a wire trick for forge welding where you would heat your steel and then you'd drag a piece of wire on it. And when the piece of wire wanted to melt and stick to it, then you know your steel was hot enough to pull out and start hammering the forge weld. You'll see, just kind of keep this flow going. This is an 1/8 inch rod. A smaller rod's actually a little bit better maybe. And a guy I used to work for, I was doing some brazing for him, and he was a man in his 80s, and he said he didn't know how, but his brother used to do welding like this, and he used baling wire. And he used it to fix dents in cars. So they'd strip the paint on a car, go through and fix all the rock dents or any dings with baling wire and a torch, grind them down, and then repaint. And so I've tried wire before. I've had a little success. I need to work with it more actually. And not all of your torch rod will be flux coated. And I'll probably do a short video later on how to flux rod, because I reckon some people don't know how. It's easy to research too. But it's, of course, this is slower, so if you're going to be doing a whole lot of welding this way, it is going to take you a lot longer than anything else, you know, that's capable of this. And thicker metal, you're just going to want to use a welder if you can, just a stick welder, because it's harder to weld heavy materials this way than lightweight materials. Your heat transfers fast enough, it's hard to keep things hot enough. And I think torch welding's kind of become a little bit, I won't say a lost art, but it seems like not very many people do it anymore. And it's kind of a shame, because it's a good way to be able to weld thin materials without having to invest in more expensive equipment. Because that's why I don't have a wire welder or TIG welder yet, is they're just really expensive. This is very similar in some respects to TIG welding. And as you work, you can kind of see where you don't got a full bead, and then you can go ahead and kind of just not even add more rod. You can kind of just run your heat back over it, and it'll flow back. So you start practicing this, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And the other problem with torch welding is it gets everything really hot. And so if you're thinking you're going to do some panel work or something, you're most likely going to warp your panels. And so that is something to keep in mind. And so I wouldn't recommend doing this on thin panels. You'd have to be really fast and probably far better at than me. To be honest, the neighbor I used to work for who talked about fixing cars this way, his brother must have been really fast at torch welding, because I don't know how he would have done it without warping the panels really bad. But it's probably one of those things that most people just don't know how to do anymore. And I think I about got it. Get a little more rod here. I mean, see, I get some rod on there, and I can just heat, and it'll start flowing together with the what I already got on there. And once it flows together, you can't even tell where I put a little more rod on. And it's like brazing too. You can go back over what you already laid down and kind of reheat and smooth down your bead. If you do any brazing, you'll know you can kind of do that too. You can kind of go back along and smooth down where you've already been. Now, I think that's going to probably do it. I'll see if I can't get a little bit of a bead on the back, but I don't know how much I actually need it. I didn't clean that very well because I couldn't get the grinder in there well. A good wire brush would work well to clean it. And also, same with, you don't have to have this quite as clean as when you're brazing. Brazing things have to be crazy clean. But I would also recommend that you can use a file and clean up those tight spots you can't get a grinder into. I don't know if you can see that, but about the time that rod starts to stick, you can actually see the steel starting to liquefy. And that's kind of your sweet spot when you want to start getting your rod down. You can see I just got one drip of rod and I'm kind of just working it around. Oh. If you get your torch tip too close, that'll happen. It kind of plugs and then blows it off, and that's why you want to make sure you're wearing safety glasses, because you will get splattered with more or less bits of little molten steel. Nothing's going to kill you, but you don't want it in your eyes. You can see on how I just put down a little drop once it starts, and I can go ahead and spread it around. And this will help you keep from getting too heavy of a bead, because on something like this, you don't want a big, thick bead. I'm going to grind a lot of this down because I don't want to get my weight too far off on this, because it is a fan. And that's probably about going to do it. I don't know if I can get it down here or not. It's awful. I'm not going to try. It's too close along this edge and I can't get to it. I could probably hit it with a stick welder and build against this here, but I don't think I'm going to bother. So, that's pretty much how you do it. I'm going to go cool this off the hose. Went and doused it in some water to cool it off. But I can feel significant heat clear up on the other side of the fan. And as I said, you've got to be careful if you're doing anything that's heat sensitive, because that will damage it. You're not going to want to think you can put a quick bead next to some paint or something, because that's not going to work. That's another disadvantage over something like TIG or MIG welding, is you do have to deal with getting your slag off. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna get a wire brush and I can probably clean that up a little more. See, it's not going to be as good of a looking weld as you're going to get with something else, but you keep practicing, you'll get better at it. And if you have a better, this is a little bit of an odd way to weld. I have the rivet and stuff in my way. So, but it's definitely going to work for you for doing repairs on thin metal. I've done a lot of repairs on a lot of stuff doing this. And brazing, you can get stuff even thinner yet, easier. But sometimes brazing just isn't strong enough and you need an actual weld. So, yeah, that's what it looks like, and I hope that helps you. It's a handy thing, and by all rights, you could do something like this, and you could set up a small shop and only have a small torch set. You wouldn't even have to bother getting any other type of welder for a while. It would be a good way to get you started for small projects and repairs. And it also is handy because we used to carry a torch set on the back of our truck, and it's like having a welder with you in case you ever break down or have to repair on the road. like I said, it's not the best, but it's a lot better than nothing. And so, I guess that'll be it. We'll probably do some more videos on things like this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below. Tell us your thoughts and everything else. Till next time.